While the entire world was arguing about whether Prince Harry's 55 minutes with King Charles counted as a real reconciliation, Harry was quietly doing something that no expert, no royal commentator, and no palace insider saw coming. He took his children to see the grandmother they never met. No cameras, no press release, no official statement. Just a father, two kids, and a small island in the middle of a lake where Princess Diana has rested for almost 3 decades. And when the story finally came out, it wasn't the visit itself that broke people's hearts. It was one tiny detail. A lemon cake. Stay with me, because this one is different from everything you've heard this week. Let's be honest about what this week has actually looked like. Turn on any royal coverage, open any newspaper, scroll through any feed, and it's the same wall of noise. Was the meeting real? Was it staged? 55 minutes. Is that long enough to heal a family, or short enough to prove it was all for show? One expert says it's a breakthrough. Another says it's a photo opportunity. A third insists the palace is furious, and a fourth swears the palace planned the whole thing. Body language specialists freeze-framing a handshake, insiders who've never been inside anything, sources close to sources. Everyone measuring, weighing, scoring a family's pain like it's a boxing match. And look, I get it. That's the machine. That's how royal news works. The monarchy is an institution, and institutions get analyzed. Every gesture becomes a signal. Every silence becomes a statement. When Harry flew to the UK with Meghan, Archie, and Lilibet, the coverage instantly split into camps: reconciliation or performance, victory or defeat, headline or counter-headline. By Thursday, you could barely remember there were actual human beings underneath all of it. But here's the thing nobody tells you about noise. The louder it gets, the easier it becomes to miss what actually matters. Because while all of that was happening, while the experts argued and the commentators speculated and the whole world stared at the palace gates, Harry got into a car with his 2 children and drove in a completely different direction. Away from London, away from the cameras, away from every single person paid to have an opinion about his life. And if you want to understand what this week really meant to him, you don't follow the headlines. You follow that car. So let's follow it. About 70 miles northwest of London, in the Northamptonshire countryside, there's an estate called Althorp. If you know Diana's story, you know this name. It's the house where she grew up. 500 years of Spencer family history. Her family, not the Windsors. Long before she was a princess, before the wedding watched by 750 million people, before the photographers who followed her to the very end, she was just a girl at Althorp. And it's where she came back to in the end. On the grounds of the estate, there's an oval lake, and in the middle of that lake, there's a small island. That's where Diana was buried in September 1997. Her brother, Charles Spencer, chose the island deliberately so that she could finally have the one thing the world never gave her while she was alive: peace, distance, a place the cameras physically cannot reach. Think about that for a second. The most photographed woman on the planet rests somewhere no photographer can stand. In life, she was public property. In death, her family made sure she'd be private. And that's exactly where Harry brought Archie and Lilibet. Now, we don't know every detail of that day, and honestly, that's the point. We were never supposed to. There was no press pool, no carefully managed pictures, no palace announcement. What we know is enough. During this UK visit, Harry took his son and his daughter to Althorp, to the place where his mother rests. A 6-year-old boy and a 4-year-old girl, standing where their father once stood as a 12-year-old boy, walking behind a coffin, while the entire world watched him grieve. And here's what makes this moment so heavy. Archie and Lilibet have grown up an ocean away from all of this. California kids. Their grandmother exists for them the way she exists for millions of children born after 1997, as a story, a face in photographs, a name their father says with a certain softness in his voice. They never heard her laugh. They never felt her hands. Diana died 28 years before this visit. For them, she was never a person in a room. Until now, in the only way still possible, a quiet island, a name, and their dad standing between them and the water, trying to turn a legend back into a mother. If you've ever taken your own child to a grave of someone they never got to meet, a grandparent, a parent, anyone, you know exactly what that moment feels like. That strange, tender weight of introducing someone you love to someone you lost. Millions of families know that feeling. Almost none of them do it with the world's press camped 70 miles away, completely unaware. And it's what Harry shared afterwards. One small, warm, almost ordinary detail about how his family keeps Diana alive at home that tells you more about him, his children, and his mother than every royal expert combined. Because it turns out, Diana isn't a portrait on the wall in that house. She's something you can smell baking in the oven. Let's stay on that island a little longer, because I don't think people fully register what this visit actually was. This wasn't a photo stop. This wasn't part of any itinerary the palace approved. As far as anyone knows, this was the first time Archie and Lilibet ever stood at their grandmother's resting place. The first time. Ever. Think about what that means for a moment. Harry has spent his entire adult life carrying his mother's memory like something both precious and painful. He's talked about it openly. The years he couldn't cry, the therapy, the anger, the way grief doesn't end, it just changes shape. He was 12 when she died. Archie is 6. And somewhere in that gap, between 12 and 6, is everything Harry has been trying to do differently. His mother's death was a global event before it was a family tragedy. 2 billion people watched her funeral. Her sons weren't allowed to just be sad. They had to be sad correctly, publicly, on schedule, in front of the world. Harry has said the walk behind her coffin was something no child should be asked to do. So look at what he did instead. When it was time for his own children to meet their grandmother, the only way they ever could, he made it everything his own grief was never allowed to be. Private, unhurried, unwatched. No cameras, because when Harry lost his mother, cameras were the whole problem. The paparazzi chased her into that tunnel in Paris, and now her grandchildren stand at her grave, in the one place on earth where a camera has never reached her. If you think that's a coincidence, you haven't been paying attention to this man's life. But here's where the story turns from sad to something else entirely, something warmer. Because after the visit, Harry himself shared a detail that nobody expected. He said that in their home, his family bakes a lemon cake in memory of Diana. A lemon cake. That's it. That's the detail. And I'm telling you, that one sentence did more damage to my composure than every documentary about her ever made. Because think about what a family recipe actually is. It's memory you can taste. It's the most ordinary form of love there is. Diana famously loved anything lemon, and now, in a kitchen in California, 5,000 miles from Althorp, her grandchildren grow up with her not as a tragic icon, not as the people's princess, not as a face on a commemorative plate, but as a smell coming out of the oven. A cake you help stir, a story Dad tells while it bakes. That is how you keep someone alive for children who never met her. Not with portraits and protocols, with flour, sugar, and lemons. And notice the difference. The institution remembers Diana with statues, plaques, and carefully worded anniversary statements. Harry remembers her with dessert, One of those is memory as duty. The other is memory as family. When Archie and Lilibet are adults, they won't remember a statue. They'll remember that in their house, Grandma Diana meant lemon cake, and that their father's eyes did something specific every time he said her name. That's the inheritance, not titles. That. If this is landing for you the way it landed for me, do me a small favor and hit that like button. It genuinely tells me you want more stories told this way, quieter and more human. And subscribe if you're tired of royal coverage that sounds like a courtroom. Now, one more thing about this visit that almost everyone skipped over, and it might be the most telling detail of all: where Harry stayed. Because when Harry comes back to Britain these days, he doesn't stay at Kensington Palace, where he grew up. He doesn't stay at any royal residence at all. The man was reportedly told there was no suitable room for him at the palaces he once called home. Instead, he goes to Althorp, to his uncle, Charles Spencer, his mother's brother, the Spencer side. And that tells you everything about where the warmth actually lives in this family. On one side, the institution, security disputes, court battles, a 55-minute meeting with his father that took over a year to arrange, briefings and counter-briefings after every interaction. On the other side, a house in the countryside where nobody needs an appointment, where the door just opens. Charles Spencer, the same man who stood in Westminster Abbey in 1997 and promised, in front of the Queen and the whole world, that Diana's blood family would protect her boys, is still, quietly, keeping that promise. 28 years later, when Harry needs a place to bring his children in Britain, it's Diana's brother who takes them in. So you have two versions of homecoming in one single week. The palace version, negotiated, timed, analyzed to death. And the Althorp version, a bed, a meal, a walk to the lake with the kids. One is a meeting, the other is family. And once you see that contrast clearly, the question stops being, did Harry and Charles really reconcile? The question becomes something much more interesting. What does Harry actually want from Britain now? Because the answer, I think, was hiding in this visit all along. And it has everything to do with hope. So let's talk about hope. Because according to people close to the Sussexes, that's the word Harry is using right now. Not victory, not vindication. Hope. Sources say that after Meghan and the children met with King Charles during this visit, Harry came away feeling enormous hope, and that he sees that meeting not as a finish line, but as a first step in a long, slow process of rebuilding something that broke years ago. And I want to sit with that word for a second, because it changes how you read this entire week. If you believe the loudest headlines, this trip was a chess match. Every move calculated, every handshake strategic. But hope is not a chess word. Hope is what you feel when you've stopped keeping score. Hope is what a son feels when his father, who is being treated for cancer, sits in a room with grandchildren he barely knows, and for 55 minutes, nobody talks about lawyers. We don't know exactly what was said in that room, but we know what Harry did days later. He took his kids to his mother's grave, and when you put those two things side by side, they stop looking like separate news items. They start looking like one single journey. Because look at what Archie and Lilibet actually experienced in the span of 1 week. On one side, they met their grandfather, a living king in a palace, a man they've seen maybe a handful of times in their lives. On the other side, they met their grandmother, a story, a legend, an island in a lake, a woman who exists for them only through their father's voice. A living grandfather on one side, a late grandmother on the other. 1 week, both halves of who their dad is, both halves of who they are. And this, I think, is what the entire trip was really about. Not reconciliation as a headline, reconciliation as inheritance. Harry is in his 40s now. His father is ill. His children are growing up fast, and they're growing up American, sunny, far away from all of this. There's a window, and every parent knows this window, where you can still hand your children the missing pieces of themselves, where your grandmother loved lemon cake, and this is where she rests, and this is your grandfather, the king, can still become part of how they understand who they are. That window doesn't stay open forever. Harry knows better than anyone what happens when a child's connection to a parent gets cut short. He was 12. He spent nearly 3 decades living with everything he never got to say. You think he's going to let Archie and Lilibet grow up with that same silence, on either side of the family? This week says no. This week says he's trying, quietly and deliberately, to give his children what he lost. A whole family tree, not just the branch that was convenient. Will it work? Honestly, nobody knows. The distance between one good meeting and a healed family is enormous, and there are years of hurt on both sides of it. The institution will keep being an institution. The papers will keep declaring the reconciliation dead and reborn every other week, because that's what sells. There will be setbacks, and some of them will be public and ugly. That's almost guaranteed. But here's what I keep coming back to. Healing between a father and a son was never going to happen in a press release. It happens exactly the way this week happened, in small, unphotographed moments that the news cycle has no idea what to do with. A cup of tea, a grandfather meeting a 4-year-old, a drive to Northamptonshire, a cake recipe. I'm genuinely curious what you think, by the way. Do you believe this is the beginning of a real repair, or too little after too much damage? Tell me in the comments, because on this one, I honestly think reasonable people can land on opposite sides. But before you answer, let me leave you with the image that, for me, defines this entire week. And it's not the one on the front pages. The front pages got the palace photo. The experts got their 55 minutes to dissect. The whole apparatus of royal commentary got fed. And meanwhile, somewhere on a quiet estate in the English countryside, a father stood by a lake with his 2 children, looking out at a small island, telling them about a woman with a famous laugh and a weakness for anything lemon. No press, no palace, no verdicts, nobody watching at all. 28 years ago, the world watched a 12-year-old boy walk behind his mother's coffin and decided it was entitled to his grief. This week, that boy, now a father, took his own children to meet her and made absolutely certain the world wasn't invited. That's not a snub. That's not strategy. That's a man finally giving his mother and his children the one thing that cameras never allowed, a private family moment. And here's the quiet truth this week leaves us with. The moments that actually hold a family together never trend. They don't get analyzed on morning shows. They look like nothing from the outside. A walk, a story, a cake cooling on a counter. While the world argued about whether the reconciliation was real, the realest thing that happened all week was a little boy and a little girl learning that their grandmother is not just a photograph. She's an island you can visit. She's a recipe you can bake. She's the reason Dad goes quiet sometimes, and the reason he smiles a second later. Diana never met her grandchildren, but this week, in the only way still possible, her grandchildren finally met her. And they didn't need a single camera to do it. If this story moved you the way it moved me, you know what to do. And I'll see you in the next one, where we'll keep looking past the headlines to find the human beings underneath them. Take care of your people, and maybe bake something this weekend that reminds you of someone you miss.